deals with symmetry. So we're always dealing with symmetry. That's how we recognize. You can see when I tilt my shoulder, it's the symmetry of having two sides to it that has an angle that is taking and telling us that I've tilted my shoulder. Where you tilt your head, the pull, the change. So as I do this, so there's a line across here, and we can see that this is a symmetry here. Well, these are actually working at right angles to basically the center of your form. So as I'm going through the figure, and I'm thinking that, okay, first thing I was taking and just trying to feel the flow of how the thing, and it's not one line, could be 20 lines. I don't even have to use line. I could use a chamois to do this. Doesn't make any difference. As long as you're getting the feeling of how the parts move and relate to each other. That's the key to the whole process. Okay, so as I'm going across with this, then I'm taking and going through and I'm saying, okay, now I would contain this. And I'm containing this thing. Going over surface, I'm going over, taking a round. Notice that as I'm doing this, I'm changing, adjusting what I've drawn before. That's the process. You're visualizing, you're trying to understand it. You don't necessarily, people always say, well, what about measuring? I say, I don't do that. I have to put it, of course, sometimes you take and you do measure things. But in general, when I'm doing gesture drawings, I don't measure something. I'm feeling, my eye is an eye-hand coordination thing that you're working with. So as I'm doing this, my pencil in reality is not on the paper, it's on the model. So as I'm moving my hand, it's moving in conjunction with my eye going through the figure and how the parts are moving and relating to that. Okay, I'm not tracing over a photograph, so sure, there's going to be differences and changes. I will maybe exaggerate. I will take and move things. I'm not copying it. Okay? What I'm trying to do is communicate the experience that I'm having looking at the model. And that's what I want you, the viewer, to see, is what it is that I am taking and experiencing. I'm feeling it, I'm making the thing move. I want you to experience my art. Okay, as I'm sure you want to take and have other people experience your art. That's what it's all about. Okay, so as I go through and do this then, I'm taking and I draw through, I feel coming down. Okay, I'm pulling, crown, coming across through. So now let's just go through and summarize this a little bit. So what are we talking about? We're talking about first, lead the eye as number one. Number two, it's going across or around the surface to make you experience what that form or what that movement is doing in space. Okay. And then we're talking about containing this thing. So, in other words, it's just this sphere. That's what it's all about. Sequence, 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 sequence. I've broken things down in a logical step-by-step process so that it becomes easier to understand as we go through from one thing to the next to the next. These are all essential tools, but you have to take and master each one of them. They have to become integrated so that it becomes a natural flow of how you work. Okay, so we've got these 2 points now. Okay, from here, we're going to take and do a little bit more drawing, and unfortunately, I'm going to make it a little more complex. First question I get is often, after I've gone through this a little bit, is I say, okay, as I'm doing the drawing, I'm thinking of where we're at, coming through, and I start to draw, and I'm drawing this line here, and students ask, well, is this the middle of the neck? Is this the spine? None of that. It's the feeling of way the neck is going. In other words, if I'm taking that, let's just say it could be taking and feeling over this over here. Come through. See, what I'm doing, that's here looks like center. Maybe it is the center. But that's not the important part, is I'm feeling the way the neck is going. Okay. Here I'm taking and communicating, well, there's a stretch here, but then I'm moving over to here. And then I can say, well, if this is the whole, maybe the shoulder is way up here. And I'm coming around and I'm thinking I'm going over the surface in this way. And then I'm thinking, well, maybe the leg is going off. But I want to lead the eye going through. So what I'm talking about now, and this really is important, is that I purposefully break the line to create a movement. So I'm composing a sequence of lines to lead the eye through the figure. Okay. That's only half the story. Because in reality, what I'm doing is I'm taking and leading my eye through the figure as I'm trying to figure out what the figure is doing. What is the action? Okay, so now we've got 2 points. We've got the fact that the line is broken just to lead the eye. The fact is that I'm leading the eye to take and understand, communicate what the thing is. But it also becomes a composition or a design point. And as we go through the drawings, more of the gesture drawings, the drawings that we go carry farther, maybe more developed drawings, we find that we go back to these essential rhythmical lines that take and communicate the action. It's the composition, in other words. So this becomes the basis of sort of the compositional lines that we take and use within the figure. And maybe very easily they could become part of the lines. They move off the figure into the background, and it becomes more. It becomes the whole, in a sense, a design thing. I often will take a gesture drawing that I've done and take and develop that into a composition with maybe other figures, landscapes, backgrounds, whatever. But it's part of the organization, visual organization, composition of a picture. Okay, so as I'm doing this, these lines now are not anatomical. It's not necessarily the outside contour. Now, having said that is not the outside contour. Of course, it doesn't mean that it can't be the outside contour. And in fact, you will, if you listen to me talking when I'm doing gesture drawings, you'll find that I'm often coming out and saying, well, I'm following the natural full rhythm of the anatomy. That's okay. Obviously, I'm taking and looking at anatomy. I'm taking and looking at the contour, but I'm looking at it in the context of how the line leads you through the figure. I'm using these things. You're not copying. You're taking and incorporating elements in the subject that you're looking at that helps to take and show the action more distinctly. Okay, so now as I'm going through, I'm going across, I would take and be saying, okay, now I'm containing. Right. Okay, and I'm thinking going over the surface. Okay, now what's happened here is that you are instantly seeing the fact that we're having a strong compression of one element into another. So what that is saying is the essence of what I started out with, saying if I take and move the eye coming across and you feel the action of one part of the figure to another, that's the crucial element. That's really what you're trying to deal with. That's where you removed from that quote, that line of action, which is a graphic statement. This is now we're talking about how the parts relate to each other, how something twists, how something turns. You have to feel it. And I tell the students, if you don't understand the pose, get up and take the pose. Do it. That's the only way you're going to take and understand it. That's like animators, they have mirrors where they're making expressions in the mirror to take, and that's how you see it. That's how you experience it. Okay, so now what I'm going through, I'm saying, this is fitting into that. We're feeling the pinch. Well, we're having a stretch and a compression. Okay, and going over the surface of the form. Going through. So now we're taking and building, we're working with this whole movement of as we're taking and doing. I come out, I can feel, I feel the way that, you notice the way I'm going through, I'm feeling what's going on. I'm taking, and I can take this leg back and maybe even change things even. You can move around. I often, I will take and change a pose. Sometimes it's not, some poses can be really ridiculous that you would never use them. You're showing somebody where they got a hand sticking out of the side of their rib cage. That's silly. Just because it's there, you don't have to draw it. So as I'm doing the drawing then, I'm taking and leading the eye over. I want you to feel that. And then I'm taking and constructing, I'm building into that. And I'm thinking where the pelvis is across. I'm looking at that angle. I create the sense of the tilt by symmetry. I'm always talking about symmetry. Okay, now as we deal with symmetry, then you're naturally going to be talking about anatomy. We're symmetrical. You got the corners of the rib cage, corners of the pelvis. The wrists tend to be sort of square across. We work around. These are all elements. So as we're doing the drawing, and these are the various stages that you go through in doing the drawing. First, you got a very simple gesture. And then we start talking about the volumes. We're creating mass. And then once you've got that worked out, then you start to take and add particulars. The analogy is, of course, sculpture. Make an armature. Well, before you even do the armature, you have to know what is the pose. You can't make an armature until you make a pose, until you know what the pose is. That's why some of the greatest draftsmen were sculptors. You look at the drawings of Michelangelo. He's a sculptor. When the Pope asked him to do the ceiling, he said, I'm not a painter, I'm a sculptor. He said, I don't care. Okay, it's great. He had that kind of power to take and say, tough, do it. Okay, so that's what we're on. So the idea, you build masses, then you start to refine it and you refine it. But hey, what is the essence of what that pose or what that action is? It's the gesture. That's number one. There are very distinct hand movements. Okay, now this goes right down to how do you hold a pencil? Okay, obviously hold it down this way. That's not to say that I don't turn it around and get out here and hold it this way. Do that too. And you will see me do it. And of course, if I do probably most of my gesture drawing is done with a pen. So I have to be holding it this way. I can't do it going up on this wall because ink doesn't run uphill very well. Okay. And I also do an awful lot of my gesture drawing with a brush. So the tool is not just one tool, but there are distinct hand movements regardless of what tool you are using. Okay, let me show. First, the line, as you saw me, I'm leading the eye. I'm feeling the movement as I'm going through. And I will jump ahead, I look, I think, coming across, I will take, and I work a lot in the air. Okay, so that's a distinct hand movement. And it's done, the lines are done in the direction of the pencil that I'm holding rather than this way. So even in a very, very broad pencil, I can make a very, very, very fine line. Okay, the other movement is going across. Going across. Now here I am going from one side to the other, but it's going across the surface. I'm going around, and a very little talked about, or seldom talked about, is that there's a follow-through involved here, just like in golf or baseball or anything, is that you're following through, so you're actually thinking about the whole thing. You're following through. So when I'm doing the gesture, I'm already conscious of the outside contours that I'm working with, but I'm drawing across as a contour going over the surface of the form. Okay. Now, this is it's very much like a wireframe. You're drawing lines over a contour map, really. Okay. Now, so that's a very distinct hand movement. The other one is when I was talking about bracketing, going from one side to the other. So now we're talking about a movement where I'm taking and going through, I'm containing. That's different than going over or doing this. These are distinct movements that we use going over and drawing the figure. In karate, you have a punch, you have a block, you have all kinds of different movements that you make that are practical for what it is that you're trying to do. Anything, any activity that you do, whether you're a carpenter working with a hammer or a saw, there's logical, rational ways to do things. But you have to use these tools. And this is the hard part, is that I find the students have ingrained ways of working that I'm retraining people. Of course, I think my approach is the most rational, logical way of doing it. But it's also the very, very traditional. You go back into the Renaissance and you see how the artists work from imagination, how they created these works, starting everything without a model. They would bring the model in only when it came to the point of having to have specific details. But by that time, the composition was already decided. It may have already been worked up on painting-wise, all the different steps, but that's at the end. You bring in the information, you get your scrap as needed. And then you put the idea first. Bring it out. And of course, in dealing with so much fantasy today, it's all done from imagination. Comic books, doing storyboards, everybody's doing, I shouldn't say everybody, but a lot of people are doing graphic novels. It's storytelling. It's talking about movement. We're talking about sequential art.